Welcome to part two of tonight's edition of The Robust Opposition, where I'm continuing along with my theme, Will the Real Progressive Please Stand Up? Right now, I am not interviewing a candidate because I've already had the candidate for this race that we're going to be discussing on my show, which is Doug Applegate. But instead, I have an ordinary citizen who happens to be a blogger, and I came across one of his blog posts the other day and voraciously read a lot of his other blog posts after that and realized that this guy knows what is going on in the 49th district, and that is down in San Diego, where Doug Applegate is running for Congress for the second time. And that man is here with me tonight. His name is Noel Breen. How you doing, Noel?
Good evening, Lauren. Thank you for having me.
Well, you're very welcome. I want to mention to my viewers that you are a consultant in the hospitality industry, but your wife is an Assembly District delegate, and she's very active in the Democratic Party. And as such, you've been following this race, and you've been following politics in your area for a very long time. Tell me when you started your blog.
I started my blog about 5 years ago. I had never really focused on politics, but this race absolutely fascinated me with all the twists and turns. You have good people, you have a very well-defined villain, and that in itself has made it just fascinating to read about, to watch, and ultimately to read about.
So the villain in this case is Mike Levin.
That is correct.
Yes, and Doug Applegate, for people who may not have watched my show or may not be following the race down there in San Diego, almost came close to beating Darrell Issa back in 2016. He came within 2,000 votes, and this was a very popular Republican congressman, and he decided not to run again. And so in 2018, Doug Applegate decided to take him on. But then a couple of other candidates came into the race. Would you please tell us about these other two candidates, just briefly, who are Mike Levin and Sarah Jacob?
That is correct. There is a fourth candidate by the name of Paul Kerr. The polls indicate that he is not doing particularly well. He's run a very interesting media campaign. He's totally self-funded. His media has been state-of-the-art. Miss Jacobs obviously is an heir to the Qualcomm fortune and the Jacobs family fortune. She's run a very positive campaign. She's definitely targeted young women and young people to some effect. And, I have nothing negative to say about the way that they've conducted themselves at all. Competition came because Mr. Levin decided to enter the race. Now, in terms of Mr. Levin, what I found is that he has strong support all up and down the Democratic Party infrastructure. And that in itself is manifested in a variety of ways. Way number one, you have some soft money going into Mr. Levin's campaign. That's very fascinating. One of his big funders who's funding his direct mail campaign is a guy named Bill Bloomfield, who is a huge charter school advocate and funder going back for many years, former Republican, now an MPP. Then we had a PAC set up by Ellen Tosher, who they used to call her the Democrat from the Bank of America, and I believe she's soaking in a lot of other corporate money as well. They put out a poll sometime towards the end of March that if you take the raw numbers, Doug Applegate was beating Levin 23-11 and nuking everybody else in the field. But like pollsters do, they asked a bunch of negative questions. And all of a sudden, Mike Levin's in second, third place behind a guy named Rocky Chavez, who's the Republican assemblyman running. And he goes and advertises, Mike Levin is running just behind Rocky Chavez without mentioning Mr. Applegate. Then you had the 49th PAC set up and getting involved. Their division, Indivisible 49, is the ones that conducted the famous rallies against Darrell Issa. There's a lot of Hollywood money that has gone into that particular effort. Leo DiCaprio, $100,000 for Jane Fonda. The people who ran the rallies last week magically decided to endorse Mike Levin.
Jane Fonda contributed to Mike Levin.
No, Jane Fonda contributed to the Flip the 49th PAC, who basically has been supporting Mike Levin by one way or the other. They have a lady who's a common board member. That is the one who was the face of the anti-ISIS demonstrations.
Yes,
they
Ellen,
endorsed.
Ellen,
they
what's
endorsed,
her name?
Levin this week.
Ellen, what's her name?
Ellen Montanari.
Okay, so basically what you're telling me is when Doug Applegate ran against Darrell Issa in 2016, these people were nowhere to be found. They came out after the election. Indivisible, as we all know, is mostly supported by Hillary people. They're very much against things. They really are not very familiar with policy. They're just trying to be against Trump. They're very well organized. They're very well funded. I've shown that Indivisible gets its funding from Priorities USA, which was Obama's super PAC. Then it was taken over by Hillary. And then they actually had on their website, under their mission statement, that their goal was to fund the resistance in the same way the Koch brothers funded the Tea Party. Now, of course, that is gone now, but I managed to get a screenshot of that. And one of their biggest funders, Priority USA, is George Soros. Now, George Soros has always been called the Koch brothers of the left. And he generally funds a lot of open government. He's got the Open Society Foundation, but he's also an investor, and he's done some funny things like screwing up entire economies with investments decisions that he made. I mean, the last thing he did, I support. He's supporting, for whatever reason, he's supporting these progressive district attorneys that are trying to do real justice reform. So I applaud him for that. But he's funding Indivisible. Indivisible local people are not paid. Their local organizers are not paid, but their members are not paid. But they have a paid national staff, and I know this because I was recruited for such a position. So they have a lot of money. Now, all of a sudden, what worries me is they're starting to get more into electoral politics. And what you're saying is a lot of the members, that there was this Flip the 49th thing, which seemed like it was an organic, local to San Diego organization. Then Indivisible comes on the scene, or maybe simultaneously they came on the scene. They share a lot of members, and now all of a sudden, instead of being against something, they have picked a horse in this race, and it is not the most progressive horse. Do I have that about right?
Absolutely. Thank you.
So why don't you tell a little bit more about what you've observed from these characters?
Well, one thing that's been very interesting for the start is the campaign of personal destruction that went on through their Facebook and media presence against Colonel Applegate. He had a divorce that was rather contentious. Darrell Issa used this against Applegate in 2016. They conducted a huge whispering campaign against him. Number two, they put out a viability forum where all the candidates were supposed to go and get questioned by Flip the 49th and the Indivisible people. Three of the candidates chose not to go because the line between a super PAC and what they were doing seemed a little bit fuzzy. They got very angry and upset about that. That, I believe, was their attempt to launch Levin as the front runner, and nobody cooperated with him, so that was of concern. Then you have like the Fight Back California PAC with Ms. Tosher. You have another PAC that just showed up a few days ago, Neighbors for a Better Congress. And then when you drill into who donated to it, $4,000 of Oceanside firefighter money, $5,000 from a landscape architect who donates a lot to Democrats named Glenn Dake, and then another $5,000 from a developer in Irvine by the name of Michael Ray, who him and his brother, Walkie Ray, made a killing on development in the Newport Beach, Laguna Beach area for years, basically following along after Irvine Company, where Mrs. Levin worked for 2.5 years, incidentally. the twists and turns and the interconnected relationships, I'll give you one more. Guy named David Lockstein is one of the three members of Flip 49's board. He is a longtime SAIU organizer, and so you saw a lot of the union touches here and there. The Viability Forum, ironically, had signs all over, only one or we get none, and they were printed without a union bug. And this is an event put on by Mr. Union himself, David Lockstein.
This is really interesting because when I read your blog post about, the smear campaign that not the Committee for a Better Congress, the other one, what was that called?
Neighbors for a Better Congress, yes, ma'am.
Well, whichever one I read that Ellen Tauscher was involved in, I remember her as being a congresswoman. So I just decided to do a quick Wikipedia search, and I was shocked by what I found. Apparently, when she was in Congress, she was one of the founders of what they call the New Democrats, which we commonly refer to as the Blue Dog Democrats, who we know are the centrist Democrats. And we know that they started during the 90s, and Clinton was one of them. And famously, people said, this was the shift away from the Democratic Party getting their money from unions, because as union membership started to decline, they started to look around for another source of money, and that source of money was Wall Street. So that's why you had Clinton, among other non-progressive things that he did, deregulate the banks, because his Treasury Secretary, Robert Rubin, had come from Goldman Sachs. So many of these Treasury Secretaries come from Goldman Sachs, and they wanted to have a merger of Travelers Insurance and Citibank. And they could not do that under the current Glass-Steagall rule, where you had to separate commercial and investment banking. So there was a big push. And I remember at the time, it was the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act. And Graham, Leach, and Bliley were all Republicans. But even though they put forward the act, it was really pushed from within inside the administration by Robert Rubin, who, after Glass-Steagall got repealed, he went on to become, wait for it, the head of the newly merged firm Citicorp. And Sandy Weil, years later, he was the chairman of the Travelers Insurance Company. He said that that was a big mistake. I don't think Robert Rubin has ever admitted that it's a mistake, but he went on to earn something along the lines of $14 million a year as CEO of that company. And Ellen Tauscher was right along with them. She now works for a law firm that represents, well, she started out as a banker herself, and now she works for a law firm that represents big defense and big oil, big energy, big oil, the fossil fuel companies. And of course, I would like you to talk a little bit about Mike Levin and how he's positioning himself as an environmental attorney. Just what kind of environmental attorney is Mike Levin?
Well, first of all, Mr. Levin's only courtroom experience is doing 3 foreclosures on poor people in Oceanside for Countrywide back during the housing crisis. Mr. Levin has worked for 2-3 different fuel cell related companies. His last post was Fuel Cell Energy, who is been acquired, but for the most part, by Exxon. Obviously, you can talk about fuel cells as a clean form of energy, but that's intrinsically ridiculous because they're using fossil fuel. So the entire environmental attorney claims are actually he has been a lobbyist for firms that are making money off of fuel cell and carbon. It is all ridiculous. It's the biggest bait and switch known to man. Now, he backed off of the claim of being an environmental attorney and went to environmental activist after a few people pointed out that he had never gone over and played, like Gregory Peck in the movie, this brave person suing polluters to protect trees and animals and the water. Yeah. And so, his environmental advocacy has actually been advancing the interest of energy companies that make their money off of carbon. It's a lie, just a total lie. And what's scarier than anything, ma'am, is the fact that they think everybody is so gullible, but they did such a great job of controlling the narrative that every time somebody tried to utter the truth, they got in trouble. That's why he threw out 11 delegates, or attempted to throw out 11 delegates at the convention that opposed him.
Yeah, let's talk about that California Democratic Party convention, because I was down there. And was there an endorsement? I can't remember if there was no endorsement or.
He barely fell short. Obviously, every congressional district has a whole bunch of people, I believe there were 7 and 8, appointed by Chairman Bauman himself. And 2 of the people that voted for Mike Levin in the Congressional 49th Caucus were Mike and Chrissy Levin. Surprise. And so they put their thumb on the scale. Mr. Levin tried to move against 11 progressive delegates for supposedly signing a petition for Gail McLaughlin, a petition in lieu. Now, that's a little shaky because the bylaw says public record, but the fact remains voter records are all private. You cannot take a copy of a voter record and put it online. They won't let you have that. So that's not even a public declaration of everything intrinsically because of that. What they wanted to do is they filed this 2 days before the convention. It was at the instigation of Adam Berkowitz. The San Diego County Democratic Party Central Committee, hardly a bastion of truth, voted unanimously in support of their 11 local delegates, and Mr. Levin has admitted to the fact that they instigated that dirty little trick. Those delegates, by the way, are still in jeopardy, and my fear is that if Mr. Levin somehow wins on Tuesday, my wife and 10 other people are going to get tossed out of the party as ADEMs for nothing more than crossing Mike Levin.
Yes, well, let's talk about the California Democratic Party down there. I should say the San Diego Democratic Party, because there's been a lot of shenanigans in multiple races. And specifically, I wanted you to talk about Francine Busby and what she's been up to.
Well, Miss Busby has been in a variety of trouble lately. The most prominent recent one is that they had the Roosevelt Day dinner last April. You had a group of young women of color wanted to go over and silently demonstrate against a union leader here in town named Mickey Kasparian, who's got a very, very bad track record for harassment and different things. Miss Busby approached their table, raised a holy stink, made sure the group was sat in the back with, incidentally, all the other progressive groups, so on and so forth. A couple of weeks later, the County Central Committee meeting is heavily patrolled by security, which never happens. They try to control access. 8 to 10 young women of color started demonstrating outside their door. They were promised they could go in and address the group, and they were turned away at the door. And the police were called 9 times on these young women. 9 times, like they were outside the door really doing violence. I happened to take video of that whole incident, and I had Central Committee meeting members screaming at me to stay out of it when I tried to show the officer who came to arrest this young lady who was a leader the video, which showed she did nothing that was arrestable for. That's just one incident. Francine Busby is openly campaigning for Mike Levin and has sent several emails and Facebook communications that she is down and dirty in the trenches working for Mike Levin, along with a whole laundry list of other local figures. The San Diego Democratic Party also is spending $1 gazillion on electing Nathan Fletcher, who used to be a Republican state representative.
Wow.
Yeah, they definitely are putting their finger out and anointing a few people that they want to make public office. And progressive candidates, by and large, are getting killed.
Yeah, well, my friend Elizabeth Warren, not the senator, but she calls herself California's own Elizabeth Warren, and she's running in the 76 Assembly District, was just telling me today that Francine Busby sent out a direct mail piece in which she had the letters RET, designating retired, in very, very small print, but basically positioning herself as the head honcho there of the Democratic Party and saying that all of the Democratic clubs were supporting Elizabeth's opponent, which is not true, and saying do not support the other Democrat in the race. So, I mean, this is one of the reasons why I Dem exited. I find these shenanigans to be abhorrent. I don't understand, why I support my friends that have Dem entered or are staying in the Democratic Party trying to reform it. But since I've seen in the last 2 years, since I was a delegate for Bernie, I've never been involved in the state party before. Since I've just been observing through my show and my live streams, I have never seen such shenanigans going on. I mean, if you think San Diego is bad, you should see what happens in Riverside with that guy, Chris Robles. They can't even hold a meeting in that central committee and he also is a private consultant who supports Republicans. He gets paid in his business to push Republicans. I mean, what is going on here? What do you think is going on here?
Well, you have a scenario in the same district where Elizabeth is running for assembly, the 76th district, where Mr. Levin has been aligned from the beginning with Tasha Burner Horvath. But what's really fascinating is Mr. Levin's donor for all his mailers, and there's hundreds of them, is a guy named Bill Bloomfield we mentioned earlier, who is also spending money to defeat some Democrat, I'm pretty sure Tasha Burner Horvath, in the same assembly seat. He's funding the Republican. I mean, it's twists and turns like that. As far as every Democratic club doing everything, I'll give you an example of how little they normally care about Democratic clubs. 7 Democratic clubs in this district have voted Mike Levin's campaign unacceptable because he has a crew of young bullies that go around to the schools and the junior colleges and threaten the poli-sci majors that they'll never get a job in their life if they don't fall in line behind Mike Levin.
Wow. That is reprehensible.
It absolutely is. There was an incident supposedly where, again, I don't think Mr. Levin necessarily is coordinating this. I do know people have called Mr. Levin and asked that it back off, and it was not dealt with at all whatsoever. They just told him to go to heck. 7 clubs. I was in personal attendance at the San Diego Democrats for Equality, where this young man who's supporting Sarah Jacobs got up and just absolutely traumatized by the way that they approached him at a Young Democrat function. Absolutely traumatized. All these 11 people going around and saying this is politics and we're on the same moral level that they are. If they had heard that guy talk, they wouldn't be saying anything. It was heartbreaking. There were 3-4 other stories about the same thing. James Aaliyah, who's running for assembly, had to go over and bodyguard a young man who was voting against Levin at the state convention. I mean, this is not right. This is not normal. Indivisible 49 has a little enemies list that they keep, and they send a lady around to dox people and shove a cell phone. Oh, yes. She goes by a fake name. I mean, it's one thing after another with these folks over and over again. It's been a constant cesspool of negativity. Obviously, not only Colonel Applegate's been in the crosshairs. They sent out a mailer about Sarah Jacobs, who, whether or not we support her or not, is a nice woman. She's run a clean campaign, saying, what qualifies Sarah Jacobs for office? Nothing. Well, Jack and Bobby started running for office at age 29. Now, obviously, Colonel Applegate's a stronger candidate by virtue of experience and the fact that he ran last time.
I need to interject in there because I read the interview with Sarah Jacob in Cosmopolitan where she put a little bit of a knock on Applegate Marine. She called him a crusty old Marine. And my understanding is that she hasn't had a job for more than 2 years. And if she gets this term, it's going to be her longest job. And she's also self-financing her campaign. I mean,
Correct.
putting in several $million of her own money, her family's money, and then of course identity politics comes into play, because then Emily's List is supporting her simply because she's a woman. And you were saying to me that you think she's could be the leading candidate right now.
The polls are so inconclusive, Lauren, and I agree with your observations about Sarah's experience. There are a lot of things in WikiLeaks that are in the public record undeniably. But the Union Tribune poll that came out Friday, not the push poll that Mike Levin put out that was funded by the DCCC, shows that you have Diane Harkey pulling away from the field at 24%. You have Colonel Applegate and Ms. Jacobs at 11%. And then you have Mike Levin, Rocky Chavez, and Paul Kerr following in pretty close succession at 10 and 8% apiece for Kerr and Chavez. So
wow.
yeah, it's been a very, very interesting race, but nothing's forgivable about the politics of personal destruction, and the mailers they've sent about Doug Applegate are just absolutely tragic. You know, you're talking about somebody who's got children who are 18, 20 years old. And long after this campaign is over, long after the bells and whistles blow, these guys are going to have to live with the way that a politician used the most painful period of their lives to try to go over and do a beatdown on their dad. And the ironic thing is, you look at the Union Tribune poll, Mike Levin is running worse among women than the other Democratic candidates, including Doug Applegate. What can I say about that? I think that's people see through those things.
We've run to the end of our half hour to talk about this subject. You've done tremendous work uncovering and documenting all these shenanigans that are going on in San Diego. I've been putting up your blog several times during the show, so I hope you get a lot more followers.
Thank you, man.
And yes, and keep being open and honest and transparent. You got to hold these people's feet to the fire, and maybe someday, if we keep pushing, we're going to get some good change. But in the meantime, folks, go out. If you live in San Diego, go out and canvass. Get out the vote for Doug Applegate on Tuesday, because he is by far the most progressive candidate in the race, and he needs your help.
Thank you very much for having me, Lauren. It's been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you.